Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Evans. I'm the Assistant Director at the Career Development Center. Welcome to View It and Do It, a workshop on presentation, engagement, and delivery. And this event is co-sponsored by the Student Technology, Arts, and Research STARS, Career Development Center, and Research Society. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Timothy Bill.
Well, thanks for coming. My name is Timothy Bill. I'm an instructor in the Department of Communication. I coach for the Speech and Debate team. This is my first year on campus, so it's been exciting getting to know UIS. I've absolutely fallen in love with all the students in the campus here. And I'm here to talk to you about public speaking. So when you hear about public speaking, something that I always hear from my students is that they are afraid of public speaking, that they find it is one thing they don't want to do. It's a required class, so they have to be there, but they're not usually that excited about it. And in different surveys that look at top fears for Americans, public speaking usually is among the very top fears. So this is a survey from 2017, the Washington Post talked about. There's more fear of public speaking than heights, than drowning, than flying, than the dark, than clowns. People are more afraid of all of those things, or of public speaking more than all of those things. And the joke usually is that at a funeral, someone would rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. We're going to talk about why that shouldn't be the case and why you shouldn't be quite as afraid of public speaking as you might otherwise be. Now, you're here at a talk about public speaking, so you're probably not that afraid to begin with, but just in case, we're going to work through how to overcome that. And the biggest misconception I always like to start with is that public speaking is a skill just like any other. So if you're trying to learn how to play volleyball, or you're going to participate in a chess tournament, or you're trying to learn a musical instrument, it's a practice. It's a series of practices and learning skills and techniques over time that makes you proficient and good at the skill set. It's not something that you can pick up once for a class because you've got a required presentation and then not do it again for another year until you get your next class that requires a presentation and really expect to get any better at it. It's not something you can just pick up once and then move on from. And if I were to toss you into a chess tournament or a volleyball tournament or put a musical instrument in your hand for the first time you'd never played, that would probably stress you out and make you anxious in the same way that public speaking does, or at least in similar ways. And so we need to start reframing how we think about public speaking. And part of that is understanding why it even produces this anxiety. Why does it make us so afraid? Why does it produce such a response from us? But let's get a definition of public speaking anxiety. So I'm talking about speech anxiety or public speaking anxiety. I'm talking about the fear of public speaking, but also the nervousness, those physical feelings that you get when you're about to do a presentation. So not just the fear itself, but how your body responds to that fear and to that anxiety. And it's important thinking about this at the very beginning. Mark Twain offered some interesting insights on this. He said there are two types of speakers, those who are nervous and those who are liars. He's absolutely true in this respect, even for people who do public speaking on a regular basis. So political candidates, motivational speakers, religious leaders, they still feel nervous when they get into a new setting and they're delivering some type of speech. As an example, I teach public speaking, I teach other communication courses, I coach speech and debate. I still felt a little anxiety before this presentation because this is not something I've done in front of this audience before. So that's a natural feeling that everybody has to some extent with public speaking. And the more I teach public speaking, the more I coach public speakers, the more I've realized that you can talk about some of the skills of organizing your content and about how to deliver effective hand gestures. But the vast majority of it, 80 to 90% of good public speaking, is just mastering a couple of key skills, and we're going to talk about those. Well, let's get into the biology of speech anxiety. What's actually going on with our bodies? Just like any other sort of anxiety, speech anxiety triggers the fight, flight, or freeze response. You probably know it as the fight or flight response. So that's the physical response that's going on. Our body feels under threat. We feel as though there's something dangerous about public speaking, and so we start to get a little bit anxious about it. Now, of course, the common thinking on this is that cavemen either fighting or flighting from some sort of wild animal. So just keep this in mind as we talk about public speaking anxiety, because you'll start to see this doesn't seem to make sense in this setting. So some of the symptoms you probably are familiar with public speaking anxiety: increased heartbeat, your blood vessels constrict. So if you're someone who, when you're speaking, your hands get a little bit cold, that's because your blood vessels in your hand are constricting. And thinking about that fight or flight response, that makes sense. If I'm about to either run away from or fight a saber-toothed tiger, I don't really need a lot of dexterity in my fingers. I'm not going to do any sort of typing on a keyboard or massaging. I need blood in my core and in my larger muscle groups, in my biceps and then my legs, so I can either fight or run away. So it makes sense. Under threat, blood is pulled away from our extremities. So that's why your hands get a little bit cold. for some people when they're speaking. There's also increased perspiration. Our bodies are saying, okay, we need to be ready to exert ourselves. We better cool down. So that's why some people sweat. And they might not necessarily sweat where you'd expect in like the head, the neck area. Some people sweat in their hands. Their hands get really clammy when they're speaking. So that varies from person to person, but that's another one of those physical responses to this. The breathing increases. There's a little surge of adrenaline. It starts to inhibit digestion, which makes sense. Our body's prioritizing, I need to run away or fight, so I don't need to digest that cheeseburger I just ate. That's something that happens after I'm done with all this anxiety. And why some people feel a little bit nauseated when they're speaking, because their body's saying, okay, this is not a priority right now. We're going to focus on other things. Some people shake, depending on how extreme that public speaking anxiety is. And so these are all of the symptoms that you may or may not feel as a speaker. You probably are familiar with some of these. You can think of your last class presentation, the last time you spoke in public, you probably felt a few of these things. I know I feel my heartbeat race, I get a little sweaty in my palms if I'm holding something, and I usually have that little bit of inhibited digestion where I'm not quite nauseated, but I certainly don't want to eat at the moment. And those are the symptoms that we feel when we're going into a speech. So thinking about speech anxiety, a lot of public speaking classes spend a little bit of time talking about speech anxiety, but they don't spend a whole lot of time on it. In a lot of ways, it's the unnamed fear of public speaking classes. It's the Lord Voldemort of anxieties. We don't even mention it. And I think by the fact I mentioned it in here, your anxiety's probably gone up just a little bit, even just mentioning its name. Well, let's think a little bit more about this biological component to it. You might be asking, why? Why do we feel this sort of response to public speaking? It's not as though there's a threat out there. We're not going to, in all likelihood, there's not going to be a bear that crashes out of the closet and eats me. You're not going to rise up as a mob and strike me down. I probably am not under any sort of physical threat, but as a speaker, we still feel those. So let's think about this a little bit more academically. Why does this trigger that fight or flight response? Why do we even feel that way in a setting that really doesn't threaten our personal or our physical safety? And we can thank evolution for this one. If you think about our species and how our species has evolved over time, we came from hunter-gatherer groups who rose up out of the fields of Africa and spread across the planet. But our species evolved to cooperate in groups. And in fact, some psychologists and some evolutionary biologists have made the argument that the reason why we have such a big brain is to manage all of the social relationships that come from groupings. And some of the studies have shown humans can map up to about 150 relationships, not just me to you, but then all of those other connections between other people. We can get up to about 150 people and can manage all of those social interactions, which is a lot of people interacting. Certainly not quite as many as your number of Twitter followers or Facebook friends. So maybe you need a different definition of friend on social media, but we can manage a lot of relationships. And our species evolved that because we used cooperation. It's one of our strongest skill sets as a species, the ability to cooperate with each other to achieve our goals. So when it comes to taking down the woolly mammoth, to foraging for food, building shelters, taking care of children, we work together in groups. So our brains are hardwired, particularly the frontal cortex, to care about those sort of social interactions. So thinking about a speech, what are we doing in that case? You are stepping away from your crowd, from your group, from your tribe. You're putting yourself out in front of that group. You're going to say something to that group, which may or may not, they may not like. They may not like what you have to say. They may disagree with it. That's a threat to our belonging in that group. And that's why we feel so much anxiety about public speaking. It's not as though we're worried about physically collapsing in most cases or being attacked or mauled. We're worried about losing our social standing, of not being a part of the group anymore. It's that natural response to speaking in front of a crowd. So if you're feeling anxiety about a public speech, you should know that it's a natural response based off of 300,000-year-old hardware. We're working kind of with outdated technology. We weren't really designed to work in a world with advanced agriculture and skyscrapers and Facebook. That's not where our bodies evolved to function. So we're trying to do the best we can in those settings. So thinking about that, those hunter-gatherer groups, that membership in the tribe was so essential. So we feel social anxiety because our brain is interpreting speaking as a potential threat to our membership. They don't like what we have to say, we get kicked out of the group, we probably die on our own in the forest. So that's why we care so much about what other people think of us. So you probably didn't imagine this was going to happen in a seminar on public speaking, but I'm going to have you actually get some practice in, because as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a skill like any other, and the only way to get better at it is to practice. So before you let too much of that fight or flight response take over, don't worry, you're not going to have to speak in front of the entire group. I'm going to have you work in smaller pairs at your table. So you won't be doing anything too public. It'll be the most minimal definition of public possible, one or two other people. But what I want you to do to prepare for this, so I'll give you the instructions about what to do with this speech in a little bit. First, we're going to actually prepare the speech. I want you to spend about 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. I want you to write out on the note card that's at your table the plot to your favorite movie, TV show, your favorite poem, your favorite book. I really don't care what the medium happens to be. Just choose one of your favorite stories and write out the plot. Who are the characters? What sort of developments happen? How does the conflict get resolved? Now, as you're thinking about this, make sure you don't spoil anything for the other people at your table that you might be speaking with. You might not want to choose like the most recent season of Game of Thrones, for example. You might threaten your group membership if you spoil any plot details. But choose some story that you really like and write out that storyline. Your goal is to create a speech that's about a minute long. So you want about a minute of content. So I'm going to tell the story of Jurassic Park. I'm going to talk about the setting, how was the park created, what was the rationale behind it, what went wrong at the park, how did all the dinosaurs get loose, what did Dr. Grant and Dr. Sadler do to save everyone. That's all I'm going to do, is create that storyline. So spend about 2 or 3 minutes, write out the plot of your favorite show, TV show, poem on the note card in front of you.
Probably not.
Spend about a minute or so getting those last couple of details about your story written out. Okay, we're going to spend a little bit of time now actually performing these speeches. So we're not going to have you speak in front of the whole group. You're going to be able to speak just to a small audience. So I want you to go ahead and get in groups of 2 or 3, no more than 3, but at least 2 people. And I'm going to have you deliver your speech to your group. Now, every group is going to be speaking at the same time, so they're going to be 10, 12, 15 people all speaking at the same time. So you don't have to worry, nobody else is going to hear you but your other group member, your audience member. But I want whoever from your smaller group decides to be speaker 1 to stand up. I'll give you the start time, and then you can go ahead and deliver your speech to your audience, and then we'll just continue through until all 3 people, if you've got a group of 3, have had a chance to speak. So decide what your groups are going to be and decide who speaker one is and have them stand up, but wait to start your speech until we're all ready. Okay, all the speaker ones, make sure to stand up. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to start your time. I'll call out 15-second intervals so you know about how much time you've used. Try to go for the full minute, and then we'll switch over to speaker two. So speaker ones, you may begin. 15 seconds used. 30 seconds. 45 seconds. 1 minute. Speaker one, go ahead and have a seat. Speaker two, go ahead and stand. Are all the speaker twos ready? You may begin. 30 seconds each. 45 seconds. 1 minute, that's time. Second speakers, go ahead and have a seat. If you are a third speaker, go ahead and stand up. There are a couple of groups of three. Let me do a speaker threes in your group. Okay, go ahead. Speaker three, stand up. Well, speaker threes are speaking. If you've got a group of two, talk about what you noticed from your partner. What things did you like? What things you think they can improve? We're going to talk about some of those things, but if you've got a group of two, go ahead and debrief while speaker threes are doing their time. So speaker threes, you may begin. Everybody else, debrief. $30 seconds. 45 seconds. 1 minute. Speaker threes, you can go ahead and have a seat. That experience was probably a little nerve-wracking for you. You probably didn't expect to be doing a speech in this setting. The anxiety probably went up a little bit while you were going through thinking about what you want to say. So I noticed a few issues coming up, as we're talking about some of the key elements of a good speech, and then we're going to actually go ahead and do this all over again, so we can keep getting some practice. But what can you do to improve? There are a couple of key elements you can do, just like with any athletic organization or with any sort of musical instrument. There are key elements of technique that we need to practice. So first, we need to work on improving our physical technique. As we're under social threat, what does our body want to do? We want to close down. So we try to put our arms in front of us. We start to lean off to one side. What are we doing? We're trying to communicate, I'm not a threat. Don't kick me out of the group. Don't get too stressed about what I have to say. We're trying to soften our message. If you're trying to present and be an effective speaker, that's not what you want to do. You're not going to connect with your audience. You're not going to actually get across your main points. And so you have to fight that by developing that technique. So we're going to focus on two things with our physical technique. First, when you're standing, make sure your feet are just past shoulder width apart. So if you're trying to prevent yourself from swaying or from leaning or from hunching over, putting them just past shoulder length apart is going to give you that better stance, that better physical stance to present. Because if you start to sway, you actually have to move your hips to actually move away from center. So it helps keep you a little bit more centered as a speaker. Second, you want to make sure your shoulders are back and your head is up so that your diaphragm and the air moving out of your lungs is moving out of the most comfortable way. So you're not going to end up straining your voice. You're also going to be able to project and emphasize what you're trying to say a little bit more. So those are two key things I want you to focus on this next time you're developing your speech. And second, you're already doing this pretty well. Give just a little bit of eye contact to your audience. So look up from your notes every now and then. Make sure that you're seeing the people that you're talking to. Some of my students will go into competition on occasion. I'll ask them, well, who is your judge? And they won't even remember because they were so focused on getting their speech out, they didn't even bother to look at who their judge was or to notice any of the information about them. I'm like, well, you can't really adapt to your audience if you didn't ever see them. So make sure you're giving your audience a little bit of eye contact. We're going to go ahead and do this all again. Whoever was speaker 2 or speaker 3, you can go ahead and go first this time. We're going to change up the order a little bit. As they're speaking, the other people in the group, I want you to be, if they start to lean to one side, if they're leaning on a chair or on the table, point that out to them so they notice that they're doing it. The only way that you can improve technique, just like with basketball or playing the clarinet, is if someone points out when we start to do something that's not the best technique. So go ahead, decide who's going to be your next speaker, try to change that order up a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and do this all over again. Okay, speaker 1, go ahead and stand. Your minute begins now. 15 seconds. 30 seconds. 45 seconds. 1 minute. Speaker 1, you can go ahead and have a seat. Next speakers, go ahead and stand up. Speaker 2, your time begins now. Thirty seconds. 20 45 seconds. In 1 minute, speaker 2, go ahead and have a seat. If you are speaker 3, go ahead and stand up. Just as before, if you had a group of 2, go ahead and talk about what you noticed. What was the eye contact like? What was the posture like when they were speaking? Spend about a minute doing that. Speaker 3s, your time begins now. 30 seconds. Okay, 45 seconds. And that's 1 minute. So I can already tell you just from watching you, that those speeches were substantially better than the first ones that you delivered, just from watching your confidence and your posture as speakers. Just those small changes to how you were holding yourself, making a little bit more eye contact, dramatically changed how I viewed you as a speaker. I couldn't even hear what you were saying because everybody was talking at the same time, but you were much more confident in how you appeared to your audience. So let's talk about just a couple of other technique things that we can do. And that's in how we prepare to deliver a speech. How do we combat that anxiety going into a presentation? Because that's where we can start to get in our own heads a little bit. We can start to be thinking about how anxious we are, which just makes us more anxious. So how do we defeat that physiological response? The first is actually take a series of deep breaths before you do your speech. So I'm actually have you do that here just so that you can feel what that feels like. I want you to breathe in, deep breath, and breathe out. Take another deep breath in. Let that breath out. What did we just do physiologically by doing that? We tried to push our body back out of our anxiety response. We tried to force ourselves back into our regular homeostasis where we're used to operating. It helps to oxygenate our blood. It pushes some of that oxygen back into our extremities. It tries to get us out of that fight or flight response. And so even just doing a couple of breaths before you go up to speak, those deep breaths, you actually are forcing your body out of anxiety mode, can make a big difference as a speaker. Second is to make sure you do warm-ups, and this also helps with the physiological response. So before every day of competition with the speech and debate team, we do a series of physical and vocal warm-ups because just like any other skill, there are muscles involved in public speaking. So the first thing that we always do is a physical warm-up where we shake out our hands. Go ahead and do this. Shake out your hands. And then don't kick each other, but also shake out your feet. We just did even more of that process. We forced that blood back into those extremities so that we're not keeping it all cooled in our core and releasing that tension out of our back, some of our major muscle groups. We're helping to try to defeat that physiological response. Now it's later in the day, so a vocal warm-up isn't important as much here because you've probably been talking all day. But if you have an early morning presentation, going through some vocal warm-up like Benedict Cumberbatch broke a delicate luggage rack, or a proper cup of coffee in a copper coffee pot, stretches out our tongue muscles, our cheek muscles, our diaphragm, our vocal cords. It actually warms up those muscle groups. You don't want to be the first person speaking at 8 a.m. and make it seem like you're still going through puberty because your voice cracked within your first couple of sentences. That's not going to make you feel any better. So doing those vocal warm-ups will help loosen up those muscles and help make you more prepared as a presenter. So let's go ahead and do this speech one more time. Go ahead, and if you were the third speaker and haven't gone first, go ahead and go first. Otherwise, group, go ahead and choose who you want to go first. I want you to go ahead, actually take that deep breath before you present. Don't forget about the posture and your poise. Make sure you're still centering yourself and delivering this effectively. Group members, watch their nonverbals. Watch how they're standing, watch their eye contact. Go ahead and do this again. Speaker one's up. Speaker 1, your time begins. 15 seconds. 30 seconds. 45 seconds. 1 minute. Speaker 1, go ahead and have a seat. Speaker 2, go ahead and stand. Make sure to take your breaths. Take a deep breath. Get some of that stress out. Speaker 2s, you may begin. 15 seconds. 30 seconds. 45. 1 minute. Speaker 2, go ahead and have a seat. Speaker 3, go ahead and stand up. If you're in a group of 2, I want you to focus on what you noticed your partner improving. What it actually got better as they were speaker. Talk about that. What did you notice that improved? Speaker 3s, I think we've got one speaker 3 up here. Yep, speaker 3, we're going to have you go. Take your deep breath. Otherwise, go ahead and debrief. Talk about your experience with your partner. Time begins. 45 seconds. 'Enough time. So thinking about your experiences delivering this speech and about your what you have felt going through this activity, your third speech, I can tell the vast majority of you felt more comfortable about your presentation. You were more confident in delivering your story, and you were more engaging as a speaker. I could see you not just holding the note card going, okay, here's my story. Most of you put your note cards down. You weren't even using them as you were telling your story. You were smiling, you were making great eye contact, you were really engaging with your audience. And we're going to talk about what were the 3 things we just did. I suddenly got you to do to actually prepare for this presentation. So first, most importantly, if you want this to happen in a research presentation or a class presentation, you need to prepare ahead of time and practice with an audience. So you need to not just be putting together your speech, thinking about what it is you want to say. It's essential that you practice in front of other people. It may feel awkward to present to a roommate or to another classmate or to a family member or a friend, but if you're trying to simulate the environment of public speaking, you can't do that just in front of your mirror or quietly to yourself in your dorm room or your apartment. That's not the same thing. You wouldn't go out and play a football game having never been on the football field in front of a crowd before. That would freak you out. Same thing with public speaking. You'd be freaked out the first time you go in front of an audience if you haven't delivered that speech in front of an audience before. So it's essential that you prepare ahead of time and that you practice your speech. And additionally here, not just if we prepare ahead of time, I asked you to talk about your favorite story. So it's not something that was unfamiliar to you. You've thought about that story, you've watched it, you've read it, you've enjoyed that media probably multiple times. You knew your content, so you weren't worried about remembering what the ending was to the story. That wasn't even a thought that probably went through your head because you were so familiar with your content. So if you want to be focusing on being an engaging speaker, you need to be familiar with what you're saying and having practiced it in front of an audience. And looking at public speaking anxiety, this is a little bit of the diagram of how anxiety works during a speech. So they've actually hooked people up to monitors. So they hooked them up so they got like an EKG testing their skin response before a speech. And depending on anxiety level, there'll be some anxiety before a speech starts, but as you know you're the next person to go, that anxiety goes up to its maximum. It goes up to the top of your physiological response. And after about the first minute or so, it's going to go back to wherever your plateau is for speaking. It's not going to go away entirely. It's going to level off at some point as you're working your way through your presentation. And then you all know this feeling here that going down afterward, when you get that 1 minute left of your presentation, or you know you've gotten to your conclusion, you feel that anxiety start to lift away from you as a speaker. That's when your presentation is going down. We can make that peak a little bit lower if you're as comfortable with your entire speech as you are with that last minute. That can help bring that anxiety response down. So you're not fighting your own body trying to deliver a presentation. You're focused on delivering your content. That's why preparation can be so important. It's not just about meeting the grading requirements or presenting all your ideas. It's about lowering your own anxiety response. Second, you have to take care of your body. It's your instrument. It's your tool doing this activity. So that means you need to eat appropriately for yourself, depending on when the presentation is. Some people feel nauseated before they speak. That may mean you have to wake up earlier so that you can have breakfast, get that digested before you go in to do your presentation. Make sure that you're drinking plenty of water. The last thing you want to do is end up where you're worried about, oh, am I going to be able to enunciate and form these words because my mouth is so dry. So make sure you've got plenty of liquid, and make sure that you get sleep the night beforehand. The best recipe for having a disaster in a class speech is preparing it the night before, pulling an all-nighter, and then trying to deliver that speech when you've been stressing about it the night before. Again, why preparation is so important. Doing those physical warm-ups, doing the breath beforehand, taking some deep breaths are all essential in defeating that anxiety response. And also think about your own anxiety experience. How do you process anxiety? I know personally as a speaker that, like I said, my palms get a little sweaty. So I try to make sure that if I'm doing any sort of speaking engagement, that I'm either able to put things down or that I don't have anything in my hand, because otherwise they start to get all sweaty and gross, which is why I've been putting my stopwatch down. I put the clicker down because nobody wants to touch these after I've sweat all over them. So that helps to keep that anxiety response low, because I know that's one of my ways of processing it. I usually don't get too shaky. I don't get too sweaty otherwise other than my hands. So that's one way I know how I process that anxiety. So think about what you felt during that first speech. How did you process that anxiety? And figure out what you need to do to overcome that. Is it how you eat? Is it how much water you bring in? Did you need to get enough sleep? Is it about making sure you wear clothing that breathes a little bit so that you're not feeling too sweaty during that presentation? Think about how you take care of yourself physically. Just like with playing a musical instrument, you wouldn't just jump up on stage with your trumpet and expect everything to go all right. You would prepare ahead of time. And lastly, focus on the message. Focus how you're sharing your ideas. As an audience member, we're not usually critiquing someone as an audience of a public speech. You're not going through with a rubric grading how a presenter is sharing their message. You care about what they have to say and how engaging they are. As a speaker, you have to remember that. You have to be more focused on connecting with your audience, sharing your information, and making your points, making your argument. If you're focused on that and you practice the physical techniques, your presentation is going to go just fine. You don't have to worry about all those details, and you certainly don't have to worry about a wild animal bursting out of the closet and mauling you. You can control that anxiety response and have a solid presentation. Thank you.